Here's a clear, easy-to-understand summary of Talking to Psychopaths. Chapter 1. I'll keep the language simple and engaging. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 1 Summary. Introduction to the World of Psychopaths. Chapter 1 sets the foundation for the entire book. The author, Christopher Berry, introduces us to the disturbing and fascinating world of psychopaths, especially violent criminals such as serial killers, murderers, and sexual offenders. This chapter explains who psychopaths are, how they think, and why understanding them matters. Who is the author and why he matters? Christopher Berry is not just a researcher sitting in an office. He has personally interviewed some of the world's most dangerous criminals inside prisons. He talks to them face to face, listens to their stories, and observes their behavior closely. In this chapter, he explains that his goal is not to glorify psychopaths, but to understand their minds so society can recognize them early, protect innocent people, improve criminal profiling and psychology. What is a psychopath? The author explains that psychopaths are not always obvious. They don't all look violent or scary. Many appear charming, intelligent, confident, calm and friendly. But inside they lack empathy, guilt, and remorse. Key traits discussed: no emotional connection to others, no regret after harming someone, manipulative and deceptive, extremely self-centered, can lie easily and convincingly. They understand emotions intellectually, but they do not feel them. Psychopath versus normal person. Chapter 1 strongly highlights the difference between a normal human and a psychopath. Normal person. Psychopath. Feels guilt after hurting someone. Feels nothing. Has emotional bonds. Sees people as tools. Learns from punishment. Doesn't fear consequences. Feels empathy. Lacks empathy completely. The author emphasizes that psychopaths know right from wrong, but they simply don't care. Why psychopaths are dangerous. One of the most important ideas in Chapter 1 is that psychopaths are dangerous not because they are angry, but because they are emotionally empty. They may commit crimes out of boredom, for control or power, for pleasure, to satisfy curiosity. They do not act out of rage like normal criminals. This makes them unpredictable and extremely risky. Manipulation and control. Berry explains how psychopaths are master manipulators. They say what people want to hear, pretend to be victims, lie without hesitation, enjoy controlling others emotionally. Even psychologists, police officers, and interviewers can be fooled by them if they are not careful. Talking to Psychopaths. The chapter also introduces the idea behind the book's title. Talking to Psychopaths is dangerous because they may try to manipulate the interviewer. They may enjoy shocking or disturbing people. They may lie just for amusement. The author warns that interviewing psychopaths requires mental strength, emotional distance, and deep psychological knowledge. Society's mistake. Chapter 1 criticizes society for underestimating psychopaths, believing they can always be fixed, confusing mental illness with psychopathy. The author explains that psychopathy is not easily treatable, and many psychopaths never change. Purpose of the book. The chapter ends by clearly stating the purpose of the book: to reveal the true nature of psychopaths, to share real conversations with dangerous criminals, to educate readers, not entertain them. Berry wants readers to understand that evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles. Brain key takeaways from Chapter 1. Psychopaths look normal, but think very differently. They lack empathy, guilt, and remorse. They are highly manipulative and intelligent. Understanding them helps protect society. Talking to them is psychologically dangerous. Here is a clear and detailed summary of talking to psychopaths. Chapter 2, in simple English, easy to understand and useful for YouTube or study. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 2 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 2, Christopher Berry moves deeper into the psychology of psychopaths. After introducing who psychopaths are in Chapter 1, this chapter focuses more on how they develop, their early warning signs, and how they behave before becoming serious criminals. The chapter begins to show that psychopaths are not created overnight. There are patterns in childhood, behavior, and personality that often appear long before violent crimes happen. Are psychopaths born or made? One of the biggest questions discussed in this chapter is, are psychopaths born that way, or does life make them like this? Berry explains that experts are still debating this question, but most agree that psychopathy comes from a combination of biology and environment. 1. Biological factors. Some research shows that psychopaths may have different brain structure, lower emotional response, reduced fear reactions, problems in areas controlling empathy and impulse. This means their brain may not process emotions the same way normal people do. For example, a normal person feels fear or guilt after doing something wrong. A psychopath may feel nothing at all. 2. Childhood environment. The chapter explains that many violent psychopaths had abusive parents, neglect, violence at home, emotional coldness, trauma. However, Berry also makes something very important clear. Backhand index pointing, right? Not every abused child becomes a psychopath. Many people face trauma but grow into kind, empathetic adults, so childhood alone does not create a psychopath. Triangular flag, early warning signs in childhood. Chapter 2 talks about disturbing behaviors that often appear in psychopathic individuals during childhood. Some common warning signs include cruelty to animals, setting fires, bullying other children, lying constantly, no guilt after hurting someone, manipulating parents or teachers. One key point: these children may not feel bad when punished. They might even enjoy fooling adults. Berry explains that this emotional emptiness is more serious than simple, bad behavior. Neutral face, emotional detachment. The author highlights how psychopaths are emotionally different from a young age. They may fake emotions, pretend to cry, act sorry without meaning it, observe others to copy behavior. Psychopaths often learn how to behave normally by watching others. It's like acting in a movie. They perform emotions but don't experience them. Performing art's the mask of sanity. This chapter introduces an important concept, often linked with psychopathy. The mask of sanity. Psychopaths can look polite, smart, attractive, confident, calm. They may even be successful at school, good at public speaking, charming in social situations. But underneath that mask, they lack emotional depth. This makes them dangerous because people trust them easily. Speech balloon interviews and observations. Berry shares insights from his experience talking to dangerous criminals. He describes how many psychopaths speak calmly about terrible crimes, show no regret, blame victims, enjoy attention. Sometimes they smile while describing violence. This emotional coldness shocks normal people because we expect criminals to feel guilt or shame. Psychopaths often don't. Direct hit control and power. Chapter 2 explains that many psychopaths are motivated by power, dominance, control, excitement. They may feel bored easily and seek extreme experiences. Violence can become a way to feel something, prove superiority, experience thrill. For them, victims are not people, they are objects. Test tube: can psychopaths be treated? This chapter briefly touches on treatment. Barry D. suggests that psychopathy is extremely difficult to treat. Traditional therapy often fails. Some psychopaths use therapy to become better manipulators. Instead of changing, they may learn how to fake emotions better, how to manipulate more effectively. This makes rehabilitation very challenging. Warning: why understanding early signs matters. The author stresses the importance of recognizing early warning signs. If society identifies behavioral problems early, provides psychological support, monitors extreme behavior, it may reduce future harm. But ignoring warning signs can allow dangerous personalities to develop unchecked. Key takeaways from Chapter 2. Psychopathy may be caused by both biology and environment. Early childhood warning signs are important. Psychopaths often fake emotions. They wear a mask of sanity. Many are motivated by control and power. Treatment is very difficult and rarely successful. Brain simple conclusion. Chapter 2 shows that psychopaths are not just violent criminals. They are emotionally different individuals who often display signs long before they commit serious crimes. Understanding these signs can help psychologists, law enforcement, parents, society. Psychopathy is complex, dangerous, and difficult to treat, which is why studying it is so important. Here is a clear, detailed, and easy-to-understand summary of Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 3, within 4,000 words. Blue Book: Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 3 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 3, Christopher Barry D. moves from theory into real-life criminal cases. After explaining what psychopathy is, Chapter 1, and how it develops, Chapter 2, this chapter begins to show what happens when a psychopathic personality turns into violent action. The chapter focuses on the mindset of violent offenders, how psychopaths justify their crimes, what it feels like to sit face to face with them, the emotional impact of interviewing them. This is where the book becomes more intense and personal. Sitting across from a killer. Barry D. describes the strange experience of interviewing dangerous criminals in prison. He explains that when you first meet them, they often look normal, speak calmly, smile politely, act cooperative. But you must remember, these are individuals who have committed brutal crimes. The shocking part is not their violence. It is their calmness while talking about it. Brain: how psychopaths talk about their crimes. One of the most disturbing themes in Chapter 3 is how psychopaths describe what they did. They often speak without emotion, avoid taking responsibility, blame the victim, justify their actions, show no regret. Some even describe violent acts like they are telling an everyday story. For example, instead of saying, "I feel terrible," they might say, "She shouldn't have made me angry." Notice the shift: they remove guilt from themselves. Performing arts: the art of manipulation. Barry D. explains that psychopaths constantly test the interviewer. They may try to shock you, lie confidently, change details in their story, act friendly to gain trust, pretend to feel misunderstood. They enjoy being in control of the conversation. The author emphasizes that when talking to psychopaths, you must stay emotionally neutral, avoid reacting strongly, never show fear, never show sympathy too quickly, because they will use your emotions against you. Face without mouth: emotional emptiness. Chapter 3 deeply explores emotional emptiness. Psychopaths may understand words like love, sadness, guilt, fear, but they don't experience them in the same way. Barry D. notices that many offenders never cry, never show shame, never ask about their victims. Instead, they focus on themselves, their comfort, their complaints about prison. This self-centered thinking is a major sign of psychopathy. Balance responsibility versus excuses. Another key theme is how psychopaths avoid responsibility. Common excuses include, I had a bad childhood. I was drunk. She deserved it. Society failed me. The police twisted my words. But even when evidence is clear, they rarely accept full responsibility. Barry D. explains that accepting guilt requires empathy, and psychopaths lack empathy. Direct hit thrill and power. Chapter 3 shows that for many psychopaths, violence is not just anger, it is about power, control, domination, excitement. Some describe feeling powerful during the crime, calm afterward, proud of their ability to avoid capture. This reveals a frightening truth. For some psychopaths, crime is thrilling. Observing body language. Barry D. also explains how he observes body language carefully. He notices eye contact patterns, smiles at inappropriate times, lack of emotional reaction, controlled posture. Many psychopaths maintain strong eye contact, not out of respect but as dominance. Their calm behavior can be more frightening than aggression. Jigsaw intelligence and planning. Chapter 3 highlights that many violent psychopaths are not impulsive. They plan crimes carefully, study victims, choose isolated locations, cover evidence. This shows high levels of patience, calculation, cold decision-making. Their crimes are not always emotional explosions. They are often strategic actions. Speech balloon the psychological game. Barry D. explains that interviewing psychopaths feels like playing a mental chess game. If the interviewer shows anger, right arrow, the psychopath feels powerful. Shows sympathy, right arrow, the psychopath manipulates it. Shows fear, right arrow, the psychopath enjoys it. So the interviewer must stay calm, ask direct questions, avoid emotional involvement. This requires mental strength. Brain, why they fascinate us. The chapter also touches on society's fascination with psychopaths. People watch crime documentaries, serial killer interviews, psychological thrillers. Why? Because we struggle to understand how someone can kill without emotion, destroy lives without guilt, smile while describing horror. Psychopaths represent something most people cannot imagine: total emotional detachment. Warning: the danger of underestimating them. Barry D. warns that psychopaths are dangerous not only because of violence, but because of their ability to blend into society, appear trustworthy, hide true intentions. Many are not caught immediately. Some live double lives. This is why understanding psychopathy is crucial. Key lessons from Chapter 3. Psychopaths often speak calmly about violent crimes. They rarely feel guilt or remorse. They manipulate conversations. They blame victims instead of taking responsibility. Many crimes are planned and calculated. Interviewing them requires emotional control. Brain simple conclusion. Chapter 3 shows the real face of psychopathy through direct interaction. The scariest part is not shouting or anger. It is silence. It is calmness. It is emotional emptiness. Christopher Barry D. makes it clear. Psychopaths are not monsters in appearance. They are ordinary-looking people with extraordinary emotional coldness. And that is what makes them truly dangerous.
Here is a clear, detailed, and easy-to-understand summary of Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 4, within 4,000 words. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 4 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 4, Christopher Barrady takes the reader even deeper into real-life interactions with violent psychopaths. While earlier chapters focused on understanding what psychopathy is and how psychopaths think, this chapter highlights the emotional atmosphere inside prison interviews, the psychological tension between interviewer and killer, how psychopaths try to dominate conversations, the disturbing calmness behind horrific crimes. This chapter feels more intense and personal because it focuses on real encounters and psychological battles. Office building the prison environment. Barrady describes the setting of high-security prisons. Before meeting a violent offender, there are security checks, locked doors, guards watching, controlled interview rooms. Even though the prisoner is physically contained, the psychological tension is very real. The author explains that once you sit across from a psychopath, the physical bars don't remove the mental pressure. The danger is not physical in that moment, it is psychological. Brain the power dynamic. Chapter 4 emphasizes the power struggle during interviews. Psychopaths often try to control the pace of conversation, avoid direct answers, change topics suddenly, test the interviewer's reactions, create discomfort. They enjoy feeling dominant even while imprisoned. Barrady explains that some psychopaths treat interviews like a performance. They know they are being studied and they use that attention to feel important. Neutral face emotional coldness in One of the strongest themes in this chapter is emotional coldness. The author notes that many psychopaths describe violence without emotion, do not show facial expressions when discussing victims, speak logically rather than emotionally, seem more concerned about themselves than their crimes. For example, instead of expressing sadness about a victim, they might complain about how prison food tastes. This emotional imbalance is shocking and disturbing. Performing arts lies and distortion of truth. Chapter 4 explains that psychopaths rarely tell the full truth. They may minimize their crimes, change details, blame others, claim memory loss, present themselves as victims. Even when facts are proven, they may confidently deny obvious evidence. Barrady highlights that psychopaths lie effortlessly, and they often believe their own lies. This makes interviewing them extremely difficult. Jigsaw intelligence and calculation. The chapter also discusses how some psychopaths are highly intelligent. They may study psychology, learn legal language, observe interviewer behavior, use charm strategically. Some offenders understand how society views them and use that knowledge to manipulate perception. They know when to appear calm, show fake regret, act cooperative. But beneath this mask, their emotional emptiness remains. Magnifying glass tilted left the interviewer's strategy. Barrady explains his own strategy when talking to psychopaths. Stay calm and neutral. Avoid emotional reactions. Ask precise questions. Maintain psychological distance. Avoid showing sympathy. If the interviewer becomes emotional, the psychopath gains control. So the key is mental discipline. Interviewing psychopaths becomes like a mental chess match. Warning: lack of remorse. A very important point in Chapter 4 is the absence of remorse. Many offenders do not apologize, do not ask about victims, do not express guilt, show irritation instead of regret. Some even appear proud of their crimes. This is what separates psychopathy from ordinary criminal behavior. Most criminals feel fear, guilt, or shame. Psychopaths often feel none of these. Direct hit motivation behind violence. Barrady suggests that violence for psychopaths is often connected to power, control, dominance, thrill, curiosity. Some offenders describe crimes almost as experiments, as if testing boundaries. This emotional detachment makes their actions even more chilling. Brain the psychological impact on the interviewer. Chapter 4 also touches on something important. Talking to psychopaths affects the interviewer. Listening to detailed accounts of violence can be mentally exhausting, emotionally disturbing, difficult to process. Barry explains that maintaining mental strength is necessary. Without it, the interviewer could become overwhelmed. This chapter shows that studying evil is not just academic, it has emotional consequences. The illusion of normalcy. Another important idea is how normal many psychopaths appear. They may speak politely, smile, show good manners, use humor. If you did not know their background, you might think they are ordinary people. This contrast between appearance and reality is deeply unsettling. The chapter reinforces a key message. Evil does not always look frightening. Sometimes it looks calm and charming. Key lessons from Chapter 4. Prison interviews are psychological battles. Psychopaths try to control conversations. They lie easily and confidently. They lack genuine remorse. Many are intelligent and calculating. Interviewing them requires emotional discipline. Their calmness is often more disturbing than anger. Brain simple conclusion. Chapter 4 highlights the chilling reality of sitting face to face with psychopathy. The most frightening aspect is not violence itself. It is the emotional emptiness behind it. Christopher Barry shows that psychopaths understand emotions but do not feel them deeply. See people as tools rather than human beings. Enjoy psychological control even from prison. This chapter strengthens the central idea of the book. Psychopathy is not loud chaos. It is cold, calculated calmness.
Here is a clear, detailed, and easy-to-understand summary of Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 5, within 4,000 words. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 5 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 5, Christopher Barry continues his intense exploration into the minds of violent psychopaths. By this point in the book, the reader already understands what psychopathy is, how it develops, how psychopaths behave in interviews, their emotional emptiness and manipulation. Chapter 5 goes deeper into the relationship between psychopaths and their victims, the concept of control, and the psychological satisfaction they gain from domination. This chapter becomes more disturbing because it focuses less on theory and more on how psychopaths view other human beings. Brain victims as objects, not people. One of the most powerful ideas in Chapter 5 is this. Psychopaths do not see victims as human beings. Instead, they see them as objects, tools, targets, opportunities. Barry explains that many offenders talk about their victims without using emotional language. There is no empathy, no sadness, no regret. For example, instead of saying, "I ruined someone's life," they may say, "She was in the wrong place at the wrong time." This emotional distance allows them to commit horrific acts without feeling guilt. Direct hit the desire for control. Control is a major theme in Chapter 5. Many psychopaths are obsessed with dominating others, controlling fear, feeling powerful, proving superiority. For them, the crime is not just about violence, it is about power over another person. Barry explains that during interviews, some offenders describe the moment of control as the most satisfying part of the crime. This shows that their motivation is psychological, not just physical. Neutral face, emotional emptiness revisited. Chapter 5 reinforces the idea that psychopaths lack genuine emotional depth. They may understand that others suffer, recognize that families grieve, know that society condemns them, but emotionally they feel disconnected. This emotional void is what allows them to repeat violent behavior, sleep calmly after crimes, speak about violence casually. This is not normal criminal anger, it is emotional absence. Performing arts, the mask continues. Barry D. reminds readers that many psychopaths maintain a normal appearance. They may have families, hold jobs, be respected in their communities, appear polite and intelligent. This contrast between normal life and secret violence makes psychopathy especially dangerous. Chapter 5 highlights that some offenders live double lives for years before being caught. This ability to blend into society is one of their most frightening traits. Jigsaw rationalization and self-justification. Psychopaths rarely accept moral responsibility. Instead, they justify their crimes by saying, "She provoked me. I lost control. I was misunderstood. It wasn't that serious." Barry D. explains that this rationalization protects their ego. They cannot admit moral failure because they do not experience guilt in the normal way. Their thinking is self-centered. They see themselves as important. Others are secondary. Magnifying glass tilted left psychological observation during interviews. In Chapter 5, Barry D. describes observing small details during interviews. Sudden smiles at inappropriate moments. Calm tone while describing violence. Lack of visible tension. Controlled posture. Some psychopaths appear more irritated about being imprisoned than about harming someone. This reveals their priorities. They care about themselves, not the damage they caused. Warning: the illusion of regret. Sometimes psychopaths pretend to feel remorse. Barry D. warns that regret may be strategic. Apologies may be manipulative. Tears may be fake. They might show emotion when they believe it will help them. Gain sympathy. Shorten a sentence. Impress parole boards. Manipulate interviewers. But when questioned deeply, inconsistencies appear. Their remorse often lacks emotional authenticity. Brain violence and curiosity. Another disturbing idea in Chapter 5 is curiosity. Some psychopaths describe wanting to see what would happen, test their limits, experience extreme control. Violence for them can become a form of stimulation. Because they feel emotional emptiness, they may seek intense experiences to feel something. This emotional boredom can lead to escalating behavior. Society's blind spot. Barry D. also highlights that society often misses warning signs. Psychopaths can hide behind charm, manipulate authority figures, present themselves as victims, gain trust easily. This is why many victims never suspect danger until it is too late. Chapter 5 emphasizes the importance of awareness. Understanding psychopathy is not about fascination, it is about protection. Key lessons from Chapter 5. Psychopaths see victims as objects, not people. Control and dominance are central motivations. They lack genuine empathy and remorse. They rationalize and justify their actions. Their normal appearance hides emotional emptiness. Fake regret is common. Emotional boredom can drive extreme behavior. Brain simple conclusion. Chapter 5 strengthens the central message of the book. Psychopathy is not loud chaos. It is cold, calculated control. Christopher Barry D. shows that the most disturbing thing about violent psychopaths is not just what they do. It is how little they feel while doing it. They do not explode with anger. They operate with calm detachment. And that emotional emptiness makes them incredibly dangerous. Here is a clear, structured, and easy-to-understand summary of Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 6, within 4,000 words. Blue Book Talking to Psychopath, Chapter 6 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 6, Christopher Barry D. goes deeper into the disturbing psychology of violent psychopaths. By this stage of the book, the reader already understands what psychopathy is and how these individuals behave during interviews. Chapter 6 focuses more on the mindset during and after the crime, the emotional detachment of offenders, their need for control and dominance, the psychological games they play, how they view their victims. This chapter reinforces a chilling truth. Psychopaths are not driven mainly by anger. They are driven by control, power, and emotional emptiness. Brain inside the criminal mind during the crime. Barry D. explains that many psychopaths describe their crimes in a disturbingly calm way. During interviews, some offenders explain they felt nothing during the act. They were curious about what would happen. They wanted to see how far they could go. They enjoyed the control. For a normal person, committing violence would cause panic, fear, or emotional chaos. For a psychopath, it may feel like a calculated decision, a planned action, a controlled experiment. This emotional detachment makes their crimes especially disturbing. Here is a clear, structured, and easy-to-understand summary of Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 7, within 4,000 words. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 7 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 7, Christopher Barry continues his exploration into the disturbing psychology of violent psychopaths, but this chapter focuses more strongly on escalation of violent behavior, the psychology of repetition, why some psychopaths do not stop, the emotional consequences for society, the difficulty of rehabilitation. By this stage of the book, the pattern becomes clear. Psychopathy is not just about committing one crime. It is often about a mindset that allows repeated harm without guilt. Repeat button escalation of violence. One major theme in Chapter 7 is escalation. Barry D. explains that many violent psychopaths do not begin with extreme crimes. Instead, their behavior may gradually intensify. For example, early cruelty or manipulation, minor criminal acts, increasing risk-taking, eventually serious violence. This pattern happens because psychopaths often feel bored easily, seek stronger stimulation, desire greater control, become confident after avoiding consequences. If early actions go unpunished or unnoticed, the individual may feel invincible. Brain emotional boredom and stimulation. A key idea in this chapter is emotional boredom. Psychopaths frequently report feeling empty, restless, unstimulated, detached from normal pleasure. Because they lack deep emotional responses, ordinary life may feel dull. Some may then seek extreme experiences to feel something, whether that is power, fear, or control. This is why crimes can escalate. The previous thrill no longer satisfies them. Direct hit repetition without guilt. Barry D. emphasizes that what separates psychopaths from many other criminals is repetition, without emotional consequence. A normal person who commits a harmful act might feel fear, regret, anxiety, shame. These emotions can stop further wrongdoing. Psychopaths often lack these emotional barriers. Without guilt or empathy, there is no internal warning system. This makes repeated violence psychologically easier for them. Performing arts double lives. Chapter 7 also discusses how some psychopaths maintain double identities. They may appear friendly neighbors, responsible employees, loving partners, calm and polite individuals. Meanwhile, they hide violent behavior. This ability to switch between normal life and criminal activity shows emotional compartmentalization, strong self-control, manipulative intelligence. Barry D. highlights how shocking it is for communities to discover that someone ordinary was capable of extreme harm. Magnifying glass tilted left interview insights. During interviews, Barry D notices patterns in repeat offenders. They often minimize the seriousness of crimes, blame circumstances, show irritation at being caught, express pride in avoiding capture. Some speak about crimes as achievements rather than tragedies. This mindset reveals the absence of moral reflection. Balance the illusion of reform. Chapter 7 questions whether true reform is possible for severe psychopaths. Barry D suggests that therapy often fails to create empathy. Some offenders learn psychological language to appear improved. Manipulation can continue even in treatment settings. Psychopaths may say the right words. I understand my mistake. I regret what I did. I want to change. But their emotional core often remains unchanged. This creates serious challenges for parole systems and rehabilitation programs. Jigsaw the role of control. Control remains central in Chapter 7. Repeated offenders often describe feeling powerful during the crime, in control of another person's fear, dominant and superior. This sense of control can become addictive. If power is their main reward, they may seek it again. Neutral face absence of fear. Another important idea is reduced fear response. Psychopaths often show low anxiety, minimal nervousness, calm reactions under pressure. This allows. Here is a clear, detailed, and easy-to-understand summary of Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 8, within 4,000 words. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 8 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 8, Christopher Barry D continues exploring the minds of violent psychopaths, but this chapter focuses more deeply on the emotional aftermath of crime, how psychopaths react after being caught, their mindset in prison, their view of justice and punishment, the psychological difference between regret and self-pity. By this stage in the book, one pattern is very clear. Psychopaths may understand consequences intellectually, but they rarely experience true emotional remorse. Brain reaction after the crime. Chapter 8 examines what happens after a psychopath commits a serious crime. Many violent offenders describe feeling calm, relieved, satisfied, emotionally neutral. Unlike a normal person who might feel panic, fear, or guilt, a psychopath often reports no internal emotional crisis. Barry D explains that some offenders slept peacefully after the crime, continued daily routines, interacted normally with others. This emotional detachment shocks investigators because it shows how disconnected they are from moral responsibility. Balance being caught and facing arrest. Another major theme in Chapter 8 is how psychopaths respond when they are arrested. Instead of guilt, many show anger at being caught, frustration about losing freedom, irritation toward police, blame toward others. Their concern is usually about the inconvenience of prison, damage to their reputation, loss of control. Rarely do they express deep concern for victims. Barry D highlights that for many psychopaths, the real tragedy is not the crime, it is getting caught. Neutral face, regret versus self-pity. This chapter clearly separates two concepts. True regret, feeling sorrow for the harm caused to others. Self-pity, feeling sorry for oneself. Psychopaths often display self-pity instead of regret. They might say, "My life is ruined. I didn't deserve this sentence. The system treated me unfairly." But when asked about victims, they become emotionally distant. This difference reveals their self-centered perspective. Performing arts behavior in prison. Chapter 8 explores how psychopaths behave behind bars. Some follow rules to gain privileges, manipulate other inmates, charm prison staff, present themselves as cooperative. Others may continue controlling weaker prisoners, spread fear, create small power structures inside prison. Even in confinement, their desire for dominance remains. Barry D. explains that prison does not automatically remove psychopathic traits. It only limits physical freedom, not personality. Jigsaw intelligence and adaptation. A significant idea in this chapter is adaptability. Psychopaths are often skilled at adjusting to new environments. In prison, they may learn legal terminology, study psychological concepts, understand how parole systems work, practice appearing reformed. Some even become experts at describing their own growth in therapy sessions. However, Barry suggests that in many cases, this is strategic rather than genuine transformation. Direct hit control, even in confinement. Control remains central. Even without physical freedom, psychopaths may seek control through conversation, manipulation, information, emotional influence. Barry notes that interviews sometimes feel like psychological contests. The offender may attempt to shock the interviewer, withhold information, reveal details slowly for dramatic effect, enjoy the attention. For them, the interview becomes another opportunity for control. Brain emotional understanding without emotional feeling. Chapter 8 reinforces a key psychological concept. Psychopaths can understand emotions intellectually, but not emotionally. They may explain why families feel grief, why society feels anger, why the crime is considered terrible. But when describing their own feelings, they often return to neutrality. It is as if they are describing emotions from a textbook rather than personal experience. Magnifying glass tilted left the impact on investigators and society. Barry also reflects on how these interviews affect investigators and researchers. Listening to calm descriptions of violence can be mentally exhausting, emotionally disturbing, difficult to process. The contrast between victim suffering and offender indifference is deeply unsettling. This chapter reminds readers that understanding psychopathy is important for criminal profiling, legal decisions, public safety, early intervention. Warning: can psychopaths truly change? Chapter 8 questions the possibility of deep change. Barry suggests behavioral control is possible. Emotional transformation is rare. Some psychopaths become better at hiding traits. True empathy development is extremely difficult. The chapter does not say change is impossible, but it shows that it is uncommon. Key lessons from Chapter 8. Psychopaths often feel calm after committing crimes. Being caught causes frustration, not guilt. Self-pity is common, true remorse is rare. Prison limits freedom, but not personality. Many adapt strategically to gain advantages. Emotional understanding does not equal emotional feeling. Deep personality change is extremely difficult. Brain simple conclusion. Chapter 8 highlights one of the most disturbing truths about psychopathy. Punishment does not automatically create remorse. Christopher Barry shows that many violent psychopaths regret losing control of their lives, but do not regret destroying others. Their emotional emptiness remains even behind prison walls. The chapter reinforces the book's central message. Psychopathy is not loud anger. It is quiet detachment. It is control without conscience. And that is why it remains one of the most challenging personalities to understand and to manage. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 9 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 9, Christopher Barrady moves toward the deeper consequences of psychopathy, not just for victims but for society, law enforcement, and the justice system. This chapter focuses on the long-term danger psychopaths pose, how they manipulate systems, not just people, the limits of rehabilitation, the emotional contrast between victims and offenders, why society struggles to deal with psychopathy. By this point in the book, a pattern has become clear. Psychopaths operate with emotional detachment, strategic thinking, and a desire for control, and this does not easily disappear over time. Brain beyond individual crimes. Chapter 9 emphasizes that psychopathy is not just about one violent act. It is about a persistent personality structure. Barrady explains that many psychopaths do not view themselves as evil, do not internalize moral responsibility, see their crimes as logical or justified. Because of this mindset, even when imprisoned, they may not mentally change. This makes psychopathy a long-term concern for society. Performing arts, manipulating the system. One of the strongest themes in Chapter 9 is system manipulation. Psychopaths may charm legal professionals, present themselves as reformed, use therapy language convincingly, manipulate parole boards, gain sympathy through performance. Barrady highlights that some offenders become experts at saying exactly what authorities want to hear. They may speak about personal growth, understanding victims, emotional development, accountability, but when carefully examined, their emotional depth remains shallow. Balance justice versus rehabilitation. Chapter 9 raises an important debate. Should the justice system focus on punishment or rehabilitation for psychopaths? Barrady suggests that while rehabilitation is ideal in theory, severe psychopathy presents special challenges because emotional empathy is difficult to teach, genuine remorse is rare, manipulation can continue inside therapy. He does not argue that change is impossible, but he shows that change is often superficial rather than emotional. Neutral face, emotional contrast with victims. This chapter strongly contrasts the suffering of victims with the emotional detachment of offenders. Victims and families experience trauma, grief, fear, long-term psychological scars. Meanwhile, many psychopaths focus on their own discomfort, feel anger about imprisonment, minimize the crime, express self-pity. This imbalance creates frustration within society. The pain of victims is deep and lasting. The emotional response of psychopaths is often minimal. Direct hit, the need for control continues. Even years after conviction, many psychopaths still seek control. They may control narratives about their crimes, control how interviews are conducted, control how much information they reveal, control emotional reactions of listeners. Barrady describes how some offenders enjoy attention. Being interviewed allows them to feel important again. For them, attention itself can be rewarding. Jigsaw intelligence and adaptability. Chapter 9 reinforces the idea that many psychopaths are highly adaptable. They may study psychology books, learn criminal profiling language, understand how they are described in media, adjust their behavior to appear improved. This adaptability makes them difficult to evaluate accurately. A skilled psychopath can perform empathy without feeling it. Magnifying glass tilted left the challenge for professionals. Barrady explains that psychologists, criminologists, and law enforcement face serious difficulties when dealing with psychopathy. Challenges include distinguishing real remorse from manipulation, predicting future behavior, assessing risk accurately, protecting society while respecting legal rights. Psychopathy complicates traditional ideas of criminal reform, warning why awareness is critical. One key message in Chapter 9 is awareness. Understanding psychopathy helps. Identify warning signs earlier. Protect vulnerable individuals. Improve criminal profiling. Strengthen parole evaluations. Barry D. suggests that ignoring the emotional structure of psychopathy can lead to repeated harm. Early recognition of chronic lying, lack of empathy, superficial charm, manipulative behavior can prevent future tragedy. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 10 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 10, Christopher Barry brings together the psychological insights gathered throughout the book and reflects on the deeper meaning of his interviews with violent psychopaths. This chapter focuses on what years of interviewing psychopaths have taught him, the emotional reality behind extreme violence, the limits of understanding evil, lessons for society and criminal justice, the importance of awareness and psychological strength. Chapter 10 feels reflective and analytical. It is less about shocking details and more about final conclusions regarding the psychopathic mind. Brain what the interviews reveal. After speaking face-to-face with some of the most dangerous individuals, Barry D. emphasizes one powerful truth. Psychopaths are not always insane in the traditional sense. They are often calm, intelligent, organized, socially capable. They understand rules, laws, and social expectations. They simply do not feel emotionally bound by them. This distinction is crucial. Psychopaths usually know right from wrong. They just do not emotionally care in the same way normal people do. Neutral face the emotional void. Chapter 10 reinforces the core theme of the entire book, emotional emptiness. Barry D. reflects that the most disturbing part of his interviews was not aggression or shouting. It was calm storytelling of violent acts, lack of visible guilt, absence of remorse, indifference toward victims. This emotional void separates psychopaths from most other offenders. A typical criminal may act out of anger or desperation. A psychopath often acts out of control, curiosity, power, stimulation. Without emotional depth, moral boundaries become weak. Performing arts the mask of normality. The author reminds readers that many psychopaths successfully hide in society. They may appear friendly, polite, successful, responsible. Some maintain relationships, jobs, and community roles while hiding violent tendencies. This dual existence shows how dangerous superficial judgments can be. Evil does not always look frightening. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Direct hit control as a central motivation. Throughout Chapter 10, control remains a central concept. Barry D. explains that many offenders describe the moment of control as empowering, satisfying, dominating. For them, the crime is less about physical violence and more about psychological superiority. Control over another human being becomes the ultimate reward. This helps explain why some offenders repeat their behavior. The emotional reward of dominance is strong. Balance can psychopaths change? Chapter 10 revisits the difficult question of change. Barry D. suggests behavioral improvement is possible in controlled environments. Emotional transformation is rare. Some psychopaths learn to imitate empathy. True conscience development is extremely difficult. He emphasizes that society must be realistic. Hope for reform is important, but blind trust can be dangerous. Understanding psychopathy requires caution. Jigsaw, the psychological cost of studying evil. Barry D. also reflects on the personal cost of his work. Interviewing violent psychopaths involves listening to disturbing details, maintaining emotional distance, controlling personal reactions, avoiding manipulation. He explains that studying extreme personalities can be mentally exhausting. It requires discipline, resilience, and emotional control. This chapter shows that understanding psychopathy is not simply academic. It demands psychological strength. Magnifying glass-tilted left lessons for society. Chapter 10 outlines important lessons. Awareness matters. Recognizing early signs of extreme manipulation and emotional coldness can prevent harm. Charm is not character. Superficial confidence should not replace careful judgment. Empathy is valuable. Emotional connection is one of humanity's strongest protective traits. Justice systems must be cautious. Manipulative personalities can exploit weaknesses in evaluation systems. Barry D. stresses that understanding psychopathy helps protect society, not glorify criminals. Warning the reality of evil. The chapter ends with a strong emotional reflection. Psychopaths challenge our belief that all humans share the same emotional core. Most people feel guilt, experience empathy, care about consequences, avoid harming others. Psychopaths may not operate from that same emotional structure. This does not make them mythical monsters. It makes them psychologically different. And that difference can be extremely dangerous. Key lessons from Chapter 10. Psychopaths often understand morality, but lack emotional attachment to it. Emotional emptiness is central to psychopathy. Many appear normal and socially capable. Control and dominance are powerful motivators. True emotional reform is rare. Studying psychopathy requires mental strength. Awareness and caution protect society. Brain final conclusion of Chapter 10. Chapter 10 serves as a reflective closing point. Christopher Barry D. shows that after years of interviews, one truth remains clear. The most frightening thing about psychopaths is not visible rage. It is calm detachment. Psychopathy is defined by emotional absence, lack of remorse, manipulative intelligence, desire for control. Understanding this reality allows society to improve prevention, strengthen evaluation systems, protect vulnerable individuals. The book ultimately reminds readers that empathy is one of humanity's greatest strengths, and its absence is what makes psychopathy so dangerous. Blue Book Talking to Psychopaths, Chapter 11 Summary. Introduction. In Chapter 11, Christopher Barry D. shifts toward deeper reflection on what his interviews reveal about the limits of human understanding. This chapter focuses on the psychological boundaries of empathy, the difference between understanding and excusing behavior, the emotional cost of confronting extreme personalities, society's responsibility in identifying danger, the uncomfortable truth about evil. Chapter 11 feels reflective and philosophical. It moves beyond individual cases and asks bigger questions about morality, responsibility, and human nature. Brain understanding versus excusing. One major theme in this chapter is the difference between understanding and justifying. Barry D. makes it clear. Studying psychopaths does not mean defending them. Understanding how someone thinks helps. Prevent future harm. Improve profiling. Recognize warning signs. Protect potential victims. But understanding should never become sympathy that ignores responsibility. Psychopaths often try to blur this line. They may present traumatic backgrounds or difficult childhoods in ways that shift focus away from their crimes. The author stresses that explanation is not the same as excuse. Neutral face the limits of empathy. Chapter 11 explores an uncomfortable truth. Empathy has limits. Most people naturally try to see both sides, understand motives, feel compassion. But when faced with extreme emotional coldness, empathy struggles. Barry D. explains that when sitting across from individuals who describe violent acts without remorse, there comes a point where emotional understanding reaches its boundary. This realization can be disturbing. Some individuals do not share the same emotional foundation as most of society. Performing arts, the illusion of humanity. A powerful idea in this chapter is the illusion of normalcy. Psychopaths may speak politely, discuss ordinary topics, show humor, maintain steady eye contact. In those moments, they appear completely human and relatable. Then they describe acts of violence without emotion. This sudden contrast creates psychological shock. It forces the interviewer to confront the gap between appearance and reality. Direct hit responsibility and choice. Barry D. emphasizes personal responsibility. Even when considering biological influences, brain differences, childhood trauma, psychopaths still make choices. They plan. They decide. They act intentionally. Chapter 11 reinforces that understanding risk factors does not remove accountability. Jigsaw emotional impact on the researcher. The author reflects on how repeated exposure to violent narratives affects the interviewer. Listening to graphic accounts requires emotional control, mental discipline, psychological distance. Barry D. notes that without careful boundaries, exposure to such material can be overwhelming. This chapter reminds readers that studying psychopathy is not emotionally neutral work. Balance society's role. Another key focus is society's responsibility. Barry D. suggests that society must take warning signs seriously, avoid romanticizing criminals, strengthen evaluation systems, balance rehabilitation with caution. He warns against glamorizing psychopathy in media. When criminals become famous, attention itself can become a reward. Awareness should lead to prevention, not fascination. Magnifying glass tilted left the nature of evil. Chapter 11 touches on a philosophical question. What is evil? Barry D. does not define it in supernatural terms. Instead, he presents it as extreme emotional detachment, willingness to harm without remorse, self-centered decision-making, lack of conscience. This perspective makes evil less mysterious, but more unsettling. It becomes a personality structure rather than a dramatic outburst. Warning the danger of underestimation. The chapter warns against underestimating psychopathy, because psychopaths may appear intelligent, controlled, socially skilled. People may ignore early warning signs. Barry D. emphasizes the importance of trusting patterns, not charm, observing consistent behavior, recognizing manipulation. Superficial confidence should never replace careful evaluation. Brain emotional strength as protection. One of the final messages of Chapter 11 is about emotional strength. To confront psychopathy safely, individuals must maintain boundaries, avoid being manipulated, stay rational, separate curiosity from sympathy. Emotional awareness becomes a protective tool. Key lessons from Chapter 11. Understanding behavior is not the same as excusing it. Empathy has limits when faced with emotional emptiness. Psychopaths often appear normal and relatable. Personal responsibility remains central. Studying extreme personalities requires mental resilience. Society must balance awareness with caution. Evil can exist without visible rage. Brain simple conclusion. Chapter 11 deepens the book's reflection on psychopathy. Christopher Barrady shows that emotional detachment can exist behind ordinary appearances. Responsibility does not disappear because of difficult backgrounds. Awareness and emotional discipline are essential for protection. The chapter leaves readers with a challenging thought. Psychopathy is not dramatic chaos. It is controlled emptiness. And confronting that reality requires both knowledge and psychological strength. In Chapter 12, Christopher Barrady moves toward a powerful closing reflection on everything he has learned from interviewing violent psychopaths. This chapter feels like a conclusion to the psychological journey of the book. It focuses on final insights about the psychopathic personality, the long-term danger of emotional detachment, the limits of reform and rehabilitation, lessons for society and individuals, the importance of awareness without fear. Chapter 12 is less about shocking stories and more about understanding the bigger picture. Brain the core truth about psychopathy. After years of interviews, Barrady reinforces one central truth. Psychopathy is defined not only by violent acts, but by emotional emptiness. Psychopaths may understand moral rules, recognize social expectations, explain why their actions are wrong, but emotionally they remain detached. They often lack genuine guilt, deep empathy, emotional remorse. This emotional absence is the foundation of their dangerous behavior. Neutral face calmness as a warning sign. Chapter 12 reminds readers that psychopathy is rarely dramatic in appearance. Most people expect anger, shouting, visible madness, but many psychopaths are calm, logical, controlled, articulate. This calmness can be misleading. Barrady explains that emotional stability does not always equal moral stability. A person can appear composed while lacking conscience. Performing art's the mask that never fully falls. Throughout the book, the mask has been a recurring idea. In Chapter 12, Barrady reflects on how consistent this mask is. Even after conviction and imprisonment, many psychopaths continue presenting themselves strategically, adapt their personality to the situation, learn how to appear reflective or improved. Some may become skilled at describing emotions without truly feeling them. The mask may change shape, but it rarely disappears completely. Direct hit control as a lifelong pattern. Control remains a central theme in this final chapter. Even in prison, psychopaths may seek psychological control, social influence, attention, manipulation opportunities. For many, control is not a temporary desire. It is part of their personality structure. Barrady emphasizes that understanding this need for control helps professionals evaluate risk more accurately. Balance the question of chain. Chapter 12 revisits the most debated issue. Can psychopaths truly chain? Barrady suggests behavior can sometimes be managed. Risk can be reduced with supervision. Emotional transformation is rare. Some individuals may learn to function safely within structured systems. However, developing genuine empathy and remorse remains extremely difficult. This realistic view does not eliminate hope, but it demands caution. Jigsaw lessons for individuals. The author offers practical psychological lessons for readers. Pay attention to patterns, not words. Consistent manipulation matters more than charming speech. Trust behavior over promises. Words can be rehearsed. Behavior is harder to fake long-term. Recognize emotional coldness. Lack of empathy combined with repeated harmful behavior is a warning sign. Maintain boundaries. Emotional strength protects against manipulation. These lessons are not meant to create paranoia, but awareness. Magnifying glass tilted left society's responsibility. Barry D. emphasizes that society must avoid glamorizing violent criminals, improve psychological assessment tools, support victims and families, educate people about warning signs. Understanding psychopathy should strengthen prevention, not fuel fascination. The focus must always remain on protection and awareness. Face without mouth, the emotional contrast. The chapter highlights the emotional imbalance between victims who suffer deeply and long-term, psychopaths who often remain emotionally detached. This contrast reinforces the seriousness of psychopathy as a social issue. While victims carry trauma, offenders may carry little internal burden. This imbalance is one of the hardest realities to accept. Brain final reflection from the author. Barry D. concludes that his interviews taught him something profound. Human beings are capable of extreme emotional depth, but also extreme emotional absence. Psychopathy represents the far end of that spectrum. The most disturbing aspect is not rage or chaos. It is calm indifference. And that indifference can be more dangerous than visible anger. Key lessons from Chapter 12. Psychopathy centers on emotional detachment. Calmness does not equal conscience. The mask of normality is often consistent. Control is a lifelong psychological drive. Deep emotional reform is rare. Awareness and boundaries protect individuals. Prevention requires understanding, not fear. Brain simple conclusion. Chapter 12 serves as a thoughtful closing chapter. Christopher Barry D. shows that psychopathy is not mysterious madness. It is emotional emptiness combined with intelligence and control. The book ultimately teaches that empathy is one of humanity's greatest strengths. Its absence creates profound danger. Awareness is protection. The final message is not panic. It is knowledge. Understanding the psychopathic mind allows society to respond wisely rather than emotionally. Magnifying glass tilted right. Chapter 13, the final layer, understanding the psychopath's core. Chapter 13 works like a psychological conclusion to the book. After hearing multiple interviews with serial killers, rapists, and violent psychopaths, this chapter brings everything together. It focuses on one key idea: what truly makes a psychopath different from a normal human being. This chapter shifts from storytelling to deeper psychological analysis. Barry D. reflects on what he learned from direct conversations with dangerous offenders and what patterns repeatedly appeared. 1. The mask of sanity. One of the strongest themes in Chapter 13 is the idea of the mask. Psychopaths can appear charming, intelligent, funny, calm, respectable. They do not look crazy. They often look normal, even impressive. This is what makes them dangerous. Key insight. Psychopaths are not usually out-of-control monsters. They are controlled, calculated, and aware. They know what people expect emotionally, what facial expressions to display, what words to use, when to act vulnerable. But it is an act. Behind that mask, no guilt, no empathy, no genuine remorse. 2. The absence of empathy. Barry D. highlights something chilling. When psychopaths describe their crimes, they often talk in flat tones, show no emotional reaction. Focus on themselves, not victims. For example, instead of saying, "I hurt her," they might say, "She caused the situation. Things got out of control. It just happened." The language avoids responsibility. What's missing? Emotional connection, moral conflict, regret. This emotional emptiness is central to psychopathy. 3. Control and power. Chapter 13 emphasizes that for many psychopaths, it is not just about violence. It is about power. They feel powerful when others are afraid. They manipulate someone. They control life and death. They deceive successfully. Power gives them stimulation. Psychopaths often describe crime as exciting, thrilling, a rush. They do not experience fear the way others do. Their nervous systems respond differently. 4. Manipulation as a lifestyle. Barry D. explains that psychopaths do not only manipulate during crimes. They manipulate family, friends, police, interviewers, prison staff. Even during interviews, some tried to charm the author, control the direction of the conversation, create sympathy. They constantly test psychological dominance. 5. Intelligence versus cunning. A powerful distinction made in this chapter. Psychopaths are not always highly intelligent in academic terms, but they are socially cunning. They read weakness quickly, identify emotional vulnerabilities, exploit kindness, exploit trust. They study human behavior instinctively. 6. The psychopath's view of morality. One of the most disturbing realizations. Psychopaths understand society's rules. They simply do not care. They know murder is wrong, rape is wrong, manipulation is wrong, but morality feels like a rule book written for others. They operate with a personal rule. If I can get away with it, it works. There is no internal moral compass. 7. Childhood factors, nature versus nurture. Chapter 13 revisits a big debate. Are psychopaths born or made? From the interviews, some had abusive childhoods. Some had neglect. Some had normal upbringings. Barry D. suggests psychopathy is likely a mix of biological wiring, early trauma, personality development. But trauma alone does not create psychopathy. Many abused children grow up compassionate. Psychopathy seems tied to brain differences, especially in emotional processing areas. 8. Why they kill again. A key question addressed. Why don't they stop? Because the thrill fades. They need stronger stimulation. They feel superior. They lack fear of consequences. Punishment does not produce emotional reform. Prison may restrict behavior, but it rarely creates remorse. 9. Can psychopaths change? Chapter 13 takes a realistic tone. The honest answer: change is extremely rare. Why? Because therapy requires self-reflection, guilt, emotional awareness. Psychopaths lack these foundations. Some may learn to imitate remorse, behave strategically, but deep personality change is uncommon. The author's personal reflection. Barry D. reflects on the psychological toll of speaking to such individuals. He describes the emotional coldness in interview rooms, the unsettling calmness of killers, the chilling normality. One powerful realization: psychopaths do not look like monsters. They look like people you might meet daily. That is what makes awareness important. 1. Warning signs highlighted in the chapter. Chapter 13 indirectly summarizes warning signs of psychopathic personalities: superficial charm, pathological lying, lack of empathy, no guilt, manipulative behavior, blame shifting, impulsivity, enjoyment of dominance. These traits are not about occasional selfishness. They are persistent patterns. 1-2 The core conclusion. The final psychological message of Chapter 13. A psychopath is defined not by violence alone, but by emotional emptiness combined with manipulation. Violence is an outcome. The core is emotional depth, lack of conscience, need for power, absence of fear. They see people as objects, tools, entertainment, obstacles, not as humans. Headphone for your audiobook understanding. Since you are creating audiobook thumbnails and summaries, here is a strong takeaway line you can use in your video. Chapter 13 reveals that the most terrifying thing about a psychopath is not their violence, it is their emotional emptiness. That line captures the theme powerfully. Brain final psychological insight. After all interviews, Barry D's central realization is: psychopathy is not madness. It is a personality structure. It is organized, calculated, emotionally cold, and often hidden behind a smile.